Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Legal Issue today. Uh, this is a historic occasion. We're in Black History Month. And so there are so many pressing issues that we're faced with today. And we're going to try to dive into a few of those issues. And this is a live call-in show. You can always reach us on our, you can see us on Google, Facebook, also 1310, 102.7, and a host of radio stations and the internet. We like to thank our callers for calling in each week, and also our superstar panel of attorney Milton of LA, who give us helpful insight, famous lawyer Representative Rodney King, and of course the research analyst, attorney Vanita Banks, masters in tax, cyber security expert, crack research analyst. Now, you can reach us too. You can call in directly to our show at 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. Now, this is Black History Month, and so I'm starting off today. There's so many important legal stories today, but let's start off with the term woke. I've been hearing that term that has been misused and abused by politicians. Folks, the term woke is being used for just the opposite for what it was intended for. And in my opinion, is quite frankly, the way they're used is a blatant racist. And let me explain why. Woke had to do with the fact that in America, we had institutional slavery. After slavery, we had the passage of the Black Code, and then Jim Crow laws. But Blacks were still being beaten and lynched. And so the idea is to be safe, you have to stay awake or be woke and not fall into the trap of being beaten, lynched, or killed. And so it would just be alert to these racist white supremacists and murderers. And so now to be woke is now negative. They've taken the term that intended to save human lives and somehow is a bad thing. Attorney Banks, I think, is insulting the way these terms are being reversed. I don't understand.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Attorney Lee. And you have so eloquently stated the history, regarding, the origins of the term woke. And that question becomes, how did, woke, lose its meaning, and how do we get it back? And there's really a debate right now, and even in some areas of academics and others, where people are saying that we should not use the term anymore. But as we've seen with so many terms, it has been turned on its head, to mean something that signals to a certain element of our society something negative. In San Francisco, we hear about school board members being, ousted over, quote, woke politics. We hear parents in Virginia railing against a, quote, woke agenda of teachers. And so, the term has been co-opted, and now it's just the center, it's at the center of, so many critical battles. For example, the battle, over books, so, this, quote, war against wokeness has turned into essentially, and we have to understand this, audience, it's turned into a war against Black history and sharing the true stories of our experience. So it's been turned, as so many other terms have been turned, into a slur, but at its roots, that term is undoubtedly Black, and that term belongs to us.
Well, thank you very much.
Hello?
Go ahead, sir.
Hello?
Attorney Grimes, go ahead.
Is there a correlation? Do you see a correlation between the don't use woke? Do you see a correlation between the civil rights movement, that term has become bad, or there's a movement not to use certain books? I just saw in the news yesterday the life, Hank Aaron's dream not to be allowed in the school system in Florida. Kids can't read a kid's book, a children's book about Hank Aaron's dream, be a Major League Baseball player, and how it feels to achieve your success. So there's a movement by the right, by the political right, the Republicans, that anything representing encouragement or awakening for Black people is bad. They don't want you to talk about the critical race theory. They don't want you to talk about discrimination. It appears as though they feel that's a way back to how things were. So we're going to make everything that the minorities want to do taboo. So I guess it goes right along with everything else that has been done to hold the progress that we have made back.
Well, I was talking to a friend of mine, a Republican friend of mine. We had a frank discussion, and I wanted to know, why is it so important that politicians think that the term woke is so bad? And we'll talk about affirmative action, how they got reversed. And he made an interesting point to me that I didn't think about. And here's the point. When the demographics of the country started changing, we have a lot of Hispanic Americans, African Americans, and so the Americans become more interracial, right? And so in order to maintain power by what is really a minority political party, what they did is that they first restrict the ability to vote by doing everything possible to diminish the amount of minority from voter participation. But the second thing is that if you change the narrative in the history, and you could also change the thought process of folks, and they can start voting against their own self-interest. So if people are not aware of their history, then you're bound to repeat history. So if people are not educated by the institution of slavery and things like that, there was one famous guy, I won't mention his name, even I thought he said that slavery was a choice, I think, or something ridiculous. So, so once we take away history, then people can support things that may be adverse to their own interests. And that's one of the things that's important about this discussion, that is that it's imperative that we understand our history so it doesn't repeat itself.
That is so true, Attorney Lee, and in what you just so greatly articulated. We call it more technically cognitive dissonance, when people, vote or otherwise act, against their own best interest due to ignorance or otherwise. But the word woke has long been used, especially among Black people, and it's used to signify that we need to be aware of the structural inequities, racism, and be, sensitive to, violence against Black people. And the word has been, used, it's been weaponized almost like what do we call it? A dog whistle to undermine the social justice efforts and movements of Black people. And we've seen it, so many times before. I just always use the term affirmative action, which was never intended to mean unqualified people getting jobs. But that term was so bastardized until Black professionals and other people of color didn't want to be tainted, with being an affirmative action hire, for example. Affirmative action was intended to ensure that those professionals and others who had been historically not able to get into the door to prove themselves were able to have that opportunity to enter into corporate America and other sectors.
Well, one of the fascinating things about this issue is that historically speaking, I grew up in the segregated South. We see, when you talk about affirmative action, my law school didn't admit the first Black until in the 70s. And so I got into law school because I assumed somebody sued the university for being blatant racist. And from that, I was able to get a full scholarship because they went out and got African-American with high test scores, things like that. And we were able to get in law school on full scholarship, and I thank them for it. But the problem is that it was not affirmative action. They already had affirmative action, but it just excluded African-American. It was just privileged white students. They had affirmative action because they didn't get in because their uncle or their grandfather had a name and had wealth and things like that. So we always had that. It just didn't apply to African-Americans. And so at our law school, but now there was a dramatic shift. So when you use this term, Counselor, you mentioned it earlier about affirmative action. I thought that was a term that they made such a negative thing now. And the court went the opposite, saying that as though discrimination in America no longer exists. But it still does. We see that each day, real time, not just in policing, but in opportunities and things like that. It still occurs in our country. It's not a perfect situation. We have people that are extremely successful, but we have a lot of people that are left far behind. You take a moment every now and then and listen to some of the speeches of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the elegant speeches he gave was a TV interview. And he talked about segregation and things like that. I don't know whether you've seen that, but he was saying that when the slaves were freed, they weren't given any land or place like the settlers were. And so they started off with nothing. And even though they had been in voluntary servitude, they had nothing to build on. And so he gave this really elegant story about why it was important, and led to the issue about reparation, things like that, because we've done reparation in our country. A lot of people don't recognize that, but we've been doing that for last century to certain groups and things like that. But in any event, as we were involved in this Black History Month, I think it's important that we also take a moment to reflect on what history is in our country. But the second issue, though, Counselor, dealt with Mississippi. I don't know if most people were aware of this, but Mississippi passed the Republican-dominated Mississippi House of Representatives passed a bill to create a separate unelected court system in the city of Jackson, Mississippi, that would fall outside the ability of the city's voters to vote. So the leaders have said that this is similar to apartheid era laws, and they thought it was unconstitutional. They would spend the city uh, into the city of Jackson is 80% Black, 80%. And so they're saying that they're going to appoint judges to control the judiciary of a city that's 80% Black and replace it with white judges. I mean, the whole idea is bizarre. And it passed along party lines in their legislature. And so we'll see how much leg this has, because it's so bizarre, because they're saying that the citizens would not have the right to vote for judges. And that's beginning to be a mantra that we're seeing develop in different parts of the country. So when we get African American in urban areas, now they lose the right to control the judiciary. And I think that that's a terrible idea.
I wholeheartedly agree, Attorney Lee. This law harkens back to Jim Crow. And as you said, it's reminiscent of apartheid, and it just simply must be resisted. I mean, this is very dangerous legislation, and we have to resist it. It's unconstitutional, and it's just unacceptable to create a court in a jurisdiction where the Black majority cannot vote on its judges. That is simply unacceptable.
I tried a case in Mississippi a few years ago, and I had to research a little of the law. And there was a case in Mississippi where the judge, there was 11 Blacks on the jury and 1 white, and the judge appointed the white person as the foreperson of the jury. And that case was upheld, I believe, on appeal, that was constitutional. And then when I tried, that was historical part about Mississippi and its criminal justice system anyway. And I tried my case, and I had 10 Blacks and 2 whites on the jury, and the jury selected one of the whites as the foreperson of that jury. So racism in the justice system, I'm sure it's not just restricted to the criminal justice system in Mississippi. And that case I tried was in Jackson, Mississippi. But racism in Mississippi is historical, folks. It's historical. And the legislature is just following precedent, I guess, by coming up with that appointment of white judges in a majority Black jurisdictional arena. So that's what awoke means, doesn't it? We need to be awoke to these things and try to fight against them.
Well, how did the jury pool look at your case then?
The jury pool was predominantly Black. It so happened that I think on one of my removal of excusing of a white juror, that I was challenged about it being a violation of the Constitution, and that I was excluding people because of their race, and I was. So anyway, the jury pool was predominantly Black.
And so did your client walk out of court free, man?
Well, it was a drug case, and he did not get the conviction, if I recall, of the possession for sale, but the sale.
Oh,
But
I see.
I do have confidence in minorities being on juries, and that's always been a concern of mine and a requirement that I'll never get a minority on my jury if it's an all-white jurisdiction. Like I grew up in Orange County judicial system where it's 1.2% Blacks in the county, and for 2 years I was the only Black attorney in practice in the county my first 2 years. But we insisted on having a representation of the community being minorities on the jury, and I've had misfiled because of that.
I'm
Attorney
sorry,
Brown,
what
did you say you got a mistrial in the case?
I've had mistrials because the jury pool did not represent a cross-section of the community. And I remember my first death penalty case where the judge agreed with me, said, no, it's not fair to this black defendant charged with killing a white woman not to have a representation of his race on the jury. And he mistried the case and told the jury person, not the foreperson, but the person who was in charge of the juries, told him to go to the jury room and pick some black jurors. And the gentleman, Mr. Slater, said, Your Honor, that's unconstitutional. That's not random selection. He said, I don't care. And the DA didn't object. So it finally got down to the person in charge of the juries convinced us that we would be violating the law, even though the judge said, this is not right. I don't feel right presiding over this death penalty case with this young black man with no people of his own on the jury, even though it's only 1% in the county. So it ended up, though, with the jury commissioner, that's what the name I wanted to say, when he sent up the next group of jurors, and 90-some jurors, there were 3 blacks in that pool, and they had been pre-selected, and 2 of them got called to the box. So you just got to fight this system.
Yeah, but were they were struck by the prosecutor, or were they allowed to serve?
One of them didn't want to serve because of the race issue in the case, and the other one did serve. But the prosecutor did not kick either one of them.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
interested.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Attorney Lee. I'm interested in Pierre's comment in the chat that there's a similar situation in Indianapolis and Marion County. And I'm sure, Attorney Lee, that you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, for a long time, Indianapolis, we had partisan election. And then back in the 70s, when the Nixon debacle, the county went from all Republican to all Democratic judges. And so after that, the state worked out a program that allowed half the judges in the county to be Democrat, half to be Republicans, right? And we started off when I was a lawyer, we would have maybe 1 or 2 black judges on the bench in the Superior Court. And then once we saw the process, we worked hard and we would elect judges primarily through the party system of Slayton. Slayton's, of course, is where you go in and you have political people from each voting district, and they would pick candidates for different offices. And so by the late 90s, we really worked hard. And so here in Indianapolis, we had a high amount of blacks that became precinct committee people. So the net result is that we were able to have a tremendous growth in African-American judges because of that. Because in Marion County, the Democrat Party is about 70%. There's like 657,000 voters in the county, and about 470,000 are Democrats. Out of the Democrat, about 45% of those are blacks. And so the net result is that if you had an open competitive election here in Indianapolis, with African American being 45% of Democrat base and Democrat being 7%, 45% of the judges would likely be people of color. Well, as we start having more diversity in our bench, started back in 2002, Republicans started gaining more and more power in the legislature. For a while, during the Evan Bayh eras, for 16 years, Democrat controlled the state offices, from the governor's office and various attorney generals and things like that. But when Mitch Daniels started a campaign and he successfully turned the state from blue to red. Now, a lot of people forgot about this. In 2008, President Obama won Indiana. He won in 2008, he won Indiana, right? And so, but Mitch Daniels came along and very popular governor, and he changed and they raised records amount of money. They raised so much money until they were able to change the course of history. So now having said that, we eventually had a supermajority of Republicans in the legislature, and because of that, they enacted a law, Senate Bill, I think 218, whatever it was. It allowed for the selection of judges by panel, and that's what we're doing now. And so they have a process where they have people, various groups like political parties, the Bar Association get appointment. And so this committee is ultimately controlled by the Republicans, but they select judges. Now, we organize, and I spent a lot of money on this, to do litigation on this issue. But what occurred is that in Indiana, only the counties that have an African-American population greater than 10% do they have special election process. There's 92 counties in Indiana, and only county of Lake County, which is Gary, East Chicago, Allen County, and South Bend, and Evansville, and Indianapolis have special criteria as to how you select judges. The other counties, the 87 counties, just have open competitive election that are controlled generally by Republicans. So we thought that this idea of judges, we thought that judges should always be elected the same way. And, you know, we think that we got one state, one justice system, and it just makes sense. If you're going to appoint judges, you appoint them all over the state. Or if you elect judges, you elect all of them. That just makes sense. But that's not what we're doing here. But the selection system we're using now, it's been so far so good. We've had a number of African-American judges appointed, and we actually, about a third of the judges in Marion County are African-American now. We have 2 Republicans and a lot of Democratic African-American judges. And so we've been able to do very well in this process. So far, so good, because we had some really good Republicans on the panel, and they've been trying to make sure we have a racial equity in the appointment of judges. But that's not what they're doing in Mississippi. In Mississippi, it's just the opposite of what they're doing here. And that's a quick overview of the process. I believe in open competitive election, but that's not what we're doing. I hope that answered Pierre's question. Now, the next issue.
Yeah. It was slightly complex, that's for sure. But so you believe that it ends up being a fair system because you get equal or fair representation of African-American judges in your county in particular, right? No,
sir, I do not believe that is a fair system. Because if we had open competitive election, 45% of all the judges in this county, if we have a magistrate and commissioner who say we got 100, 45 would be African-Americans. We're never going to achieve that on this appointment process ever. So even though we may gain, see, the county now out of 670,000, 470-some thousand are Democrats. So we're like 70% Democrat. So that means that we have a supermajority. And if we have any open competitive election, every elected officer in the county will be a Democrat in any countywide race. We can run a dead Democrat and win unless the voters just don't show up. And so I believe in open competitive elections. You know, I just believe in that. I think that's what equal protection is all about.
Appointment system opens up to corruption. Would you agree? Opens itself open.
Well, nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing is sacrosanct. Our current system in our county is working fine currently, but it's not what it should be. It should be open competitive election. Make no mistake about that. I will never, ever be opposed to open competitive election. On the other hand, why are we treated differently? You know, in other words, if you're going to have appointment, do it in all 92 counties. Therefore, we would have Democrat, Black, white, and these other counties appointed as judges, potentially. See, for example, in Allen County, there's no African-American judges, as I recall. And that's the second largest county city and the state. And so, but we have a bunch of callers on the line now. Let's take one of the callers. Hey, callers, you have a question for us today.
This is Pierre.
Oh, Pierre, you have a question or comment for us today?
Oh, well, I got a comment and a question. With respect to the judges, Milton, in my opinion, Nate, he has to be, I guess, circumspect, or he has to be, supportive of the system because, he's a lawyer here. He's a member of the bar. But I'm not a member of the bar. I'm just John Q. citizen. And I tell you, these corrupt Republicans running our courts here, it's a mess.
Right.
Indianapolis is it's the state capital, and that's where everything goes on. So you got to control the state capital. You can't have all these black people doing that. So that's why they went after the courts. And it's racist to the core, but, it's just, and also with our court system here, we can't have cameras in the court. So you won't see any of these high profile trials like you see in California or around the country or whatever, because they don't allow cameras in courtrooms in the state courts. It's completely, in my opinion, it's not right. But what I wanted to ask all of the attorneys, and especially you, Milton, did you see that video that the LAPD put out about with Keenan Anderson? LAPD put out a video, the video with all the officers' body cameras that tased Keenan Anderson. And, he's the young man that got to the hospital, but he died like 4 hours after getting to the hospital. Now, that's textbook policing. And I just wanted to get your opinion on it if you saw the video.
Textbook policing in what regard? Putting out the video?
The way the cops handled Keenan Anderson, how they talked to him, they didn't beat the mess out of him. They even had leg restraints ready so he couldn't run. I just thought it was textbook versus what happened in Memphis. I just thought it was the way policing should be when you have to get somebody under control who's obviously under the influence of drugs. But I didn't know if you'd seen the video or not.
Some of the video, I can't say, excuse me, that I've seen the videos you've seen, but I'm a little concerned with the use of the taser so readily, and especially when you have a person that appears to be suffering from some type of mental problem or problem. They could have a heart problem, and I don't think the taser and heart problems mix very well. It's like gas and fire. So I don't know. I'm not ready to say that it was textbook policing, because I do believe that where you see a person acting deranged and either drugged up or mentally ill, you have to assess that situation to the fullest and then apply the force that you think is necessary, and not just arbitrarily and rush to judgment and apply restraint force that could be complicating things. So I don't know if I agree about textbook police work, Pierre.
Okay, one thing I need to correct real quickly, Pierre, our system is not corrupt. I'm on the ethics committee. We have one of the best court systems in the country here, and jurors are diverse now. We're getting fair verdicts, and we have some outstanding judges. But okay, let me go to the next caller, local caller, producer. Go ahead, put him on.
Good morning.
Good morning, Reverend. How you doing today, sir?
Question is relative. How can you be in representation hindered.
I can't hear you, sir.
Nations, you have authority of European areas and controlling the various. That we are paying taxes is not true representation. How does sit back, allow this
Nate, could you repeat what the
Whatever.
gentleman said? I think
hear so egregious of what's happening?
I couldn't hear him very well. A producer, could you turn the volume up a little bit? I didn't hear exactly what the caller is saying.
either.
You want me to repeat what I said?
Yeah, you need to turn the volume up a little bit. I couldn't hear you, sir. Okay, did we lose him? Okay. I don't know exactly what he said, so I can't. Is he back on? I couldn't hear him.
I could not either.
Okay, but the idea is that one thing I need to point out, we as lawyers, we're independent, and so when something is wrong, if I see something wrong, then we go after it, whether it's in my backyard or anywhere. You know, right is right, wrong is wrong, and so. But the legal profession is the most regulated profession of all professions. When you see in the last presidential election, all those MAGA lawyers, they've all been sanctioned. They've been sanctioned, they're losing a law license and stuff like that. So unlike what most people think, because we're such a highly regulated profession, when you have corrupt judicial officials, they get removed from the bench and they end up in jail. They do criminal misconduct. And so rest assured, the American judicial system, we fight hard. We disagree with a lot of stuff, but it's the best system in the world right now. Okay, Reverend Thornton, could you speak up now? He's back on the line.
Okay, I'm back, Lee. Here's my question, and I hope you can. How do we those types of laws when we are taxpayers? We're being taxed without representation, obviously. How they're able to rig and do all the things across the nation that you see European legislators are doing. So how do those of us, even legal lawyers and Black Bars Association, how are they sitting back taking the not showing any sense of resolve as to how unconstitutional this is? I mean, it's pure racism, and for those of you who represent civil perspective, why isn't this taken to a higher level as this is?
I don't know about your communications, sir, but I believe there is room in our judicial system overall for some house cleaning, and I don't like the lack of conflict in some of our proceedings, like the Supreme Court, for instance, where judges are treated royally by corporate American on vacations and expensive travel, and Clarence Thomas doesn't have to declare conflict with what his wife does. I do believe that there is some, I don't want to say loopholes, Nate, but there's some cleaning up and tightening up that could be done in our judicial system dealing with our judges.
Well, I think they need a ethical rule for the Supreme Court. I'm a member of the Supreme Court. They need to have ethics rules for the U.S. Supreme Court, the same as all the other judges. I don't think that they should be exempt. And I think it's problematic. Right. I think people lose faith in the system when they see things such as what the Thomas wife is doing or the Chief Justice's wife. It's obviously something that put a bad taste in your mouth in terms of justice. If you could have a Supreme Court judge's wife going around being a MAGA maniac, saying all these crazy things about election fraud and things like that, and then you see her husband make votes consistent with what she's saying, you have to wonder, that there's something wrong with this picture. He should have recused himself, but he did not. So, I call it as I see it. I felt what the judge did was wrong. He should have recused himself from those cases because he's on the Supreme Court. They don't have ethics rules. And as lawyers, we're all subject to those. And I think that's a mistake. And I think the caller make a point in the sense that you need to have the same rule apply to our highest court. In our state Supreme Court, our judges are subject to ethics rules. So why not the U.S. Supreme Court? But in any event,
No, I'm just saying some of the courts need some cleaning up, need some tightening up. That's all.
Okay.
Some of them.
Producer, let's go to the next caller. Caller, you have a question or comments for us today?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I don't understand how all of these people that are supposed to represent racial equality can let things go by. I'm a black male. A white woman attacked me in 2014, stuck her fingers up my nose, and police came over and wrote it up. They arrested me for touching her. All I did was slap her fingers out of my nose. Okay? The fact she attacked me, didn't get charged. And that ended up, I ended up being in jail for the first time in my life for 10 days. 10 days I was in jail. My wife did not eat or drink anything because she blocked my number when I went to jail. I had a $30,000 medical bill for my wife. I lost my teaching license in Lawrence Township. And I went through EOC, the Congressman Carson's office, went straight up through Prince's office all the way to President Bush, and they agreed with the firing. State, and you could fire a person if you didn't like. So wrestling with that injury in my nose, get the raw meat out of my nose every day, and the doctor tell me, "You got to be shot free."
Well, sir, did you have an attorney to represent you in that matter?
I had an attorney to represent me, but he didn't do any good.
Well, I don't know all the facts, don't know the woman's position or the full case, sir, but things do happen in the courts sometimes because of circumstances that may not be just. And I don't have any explanation more than that. It's not perfect. And there is racism. I don't know what it's your outcome, but I agree with Nate that it is one of the best systems created on paper, but there are some components of it that lend itself to unfairness towards some people. So we're trying to make it better.
Very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear what happened to you. Every day I hear different stories about bad things that happen to good people, and then it seems like some people just get away with things all the time. But the system of justice, in order to have justice in America, you have to have accountability. When people do wrong to other folks, they should be held accountable. But when you hire a lawyer, the lawyer has to go out and develop a defense. And this case, based on what you're saying, you get scientific evidence, you get your x-rays and your trauma evidence, medical reports of what happened to you and things like that to show that you were attacked. And also, a lot of times what people don't realize, there are surveillance cameras everywhere. So a lot of time when things happen, there may be some surveillance cameras nearby that give you some certain protection. I notice I can't look on reels any day and not see some interaction with citizens with police, for example. now, particularly when Milton Grimes represented Rodney King, that led to the evolution of videotaping, seemed like, in police misconduct. So in your situation, I see all the times now where they call the so-called attack, like what you call a Karen, I guess is the name that they gave to based on an incident that happened in New York. And so the bottom line is that when you select a lawyer to represent you, it's their responsibility to collect evidence to exonerate you. Their responsibility to try to get you released from jail right away. And other than that, not knowing any of the details of the case, that's all the comments I can make on the issue over there. And so I'm sorry to hear what happened to you, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
My thing was it went all the way up to President Bush and came back down, and they all agreed with the police locking me up for torture. He attacked me, but I got locked up.
Yeah.
Well, see, your path that your case is traveling doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you contact the President of the United States, the President of the United States, believe it or not, doesn't have jurisdiction over Marion County and Superior Courts. The President, we have separation of power. You have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and you have the judicial branch of government. So in the federal system, that's the federal courts. The state courts, the chief executive officer is the governor. So if you're trying to go to the top of the food chain for your case, in the judicial system, it would have been in the Supreme Court, but the executive branch would have been the governor. So the governor of the state could issue a pardon, for example, or things like that. And the appellate courts could reverse the conviction if you receive one. But dealing with the President of the United States for your case would have been the wrong path of travel, in my opinion. And I don't understand how you could get relief, because the President of the United States would not have jurisdiction over our local court system. That will be the governors in our Supreme Court. And well, the governor doesn't have jurisdiction over the court, but I'm saying he's the chief executive officer of the state, but the chief justice of the United Supreme Court would be the chief executive officer of our court system. Okay? Well, thank you very much, sir. Now, there was one final issue, Attorney Banks and Grimes. That situation in Memphis keep getting worse every day since the young man was brutally beaten to death. And I watched those videotape. It just sad what they did to the young man, but they look like firing and look like they're going to indict other officers. And so that's an interesting story to follow. Milton, Attorney Grimes, the thing that I thought I was impressed with is the fact that now that we have police body cameras, I think that that's a really good evolution in terms of the evidentiary purposes. Now the police cameras are telling on themselves. At first, I think a lot of police officers thought maybe it was a good idea because they could use that to convict people. But now we're seeing justice and accountability reverse itself. We're seeing that it also exposes police misconduct. I think that's a great thing.
Okay. Yeah, it catches the misconduct when you can, but in my case in particular, I've had where the officer still will come in and say, well, my mind at that time is not what's shown on the camera. I thought I was in grave danger, and it may appear that my conduct is not befitting of the situation, but what I saw based on my experience and my training was something else, and I feared that I was in danger. I feared that my life was in danger. I thought this person was going to harm me or someone else, and the person's mind is not being videoed. So we still have police contesting sometimes what our eyes see and prevailing in that protest, Nathaniel. So we're working on getting there, which I think starts with a better hiring process and a more selective hiring process.
Well, thank you. Any final comments, Attorney Banks?
I agree that the more that we see come out over the last few days regarding the heinous killing of Ty Ray Nichols, the worse that it gets. I've had an opportunity to take a look at the initial police report. They call it the initial police incident report. And that report is totally inconsistent with what we see with our own eyes on those unedited videotapes. And I believe beyond training, that's one component. There has to be a total and holistic transformation, cultural change of the relationship between police and our communities.
Right.
Attorney Brown, one final question. What happens to those hundreds of cases that those officers are involved with in Memphis that are now criminal themselves? Do they all get dismissed? Or what do you think is going to happen to them?
No, it's just, excuse me for sneezing here. Excuse me. I don't know that they all get dismissed. Defense attorneys on those cases are entitled to the personnel file information regarding misconduct on the part of those officers, and those officers probably will have difficulty, or the prosecution will have difficulty in pursuing prosecutions involving those officers because they can't be trusted. Their integrity has been damaged severely, so their trustworthiness is in jeopardy. So that's what I think ultimately happened with these cases. It does with the ones we have out here in LA when we get this type of information on the officers. But I was thinking about what Vanita said earlier. They used to, back in the day when we first started with this video stuff, the officers dubbed the word "your lying eyes," which means your eyes are lying to you. You don't see what you think you see. Let me interpret what you see for you. And that's still their reaction in a lot of cases, Nate and Vanita, to what's on video. The lack of sound sometimes doesn't help. Some of the videos don't have sound. So it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, but I still go back to we have to do a fundamental change with the selection and the education requirement and the payment of police officers or police, or we're going to have the same problems, folks.
Well, I'd like to thank our VIP panel and our call-in today. Thank you very much for supporting our show. Don't forget, you can join us on YouTube and hit the subscribe button, also on Facebook. And next week, we will continue on with the Black History Month theme. So join us next Saturday, and thank you all, and may God bless you. Take care.
Thank you.
Hey, good day, y'all.
Good day.
Thank you.